We are right at 6:30, so I'll call tonight's Truth and Taxation hearing to order. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Munson.
Here.
Councilmember Byström.
Here.
Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Valento.
Here.
And Mayor Bain.
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Council, we have an agenda before you. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And our agenda is approved. For those in attendance tonight, tonight is our annual Truth and Taxation hearing. We will start with a presentation from staff and then move into an opportunity for public comment, after which council will bring the conversation back to council, and council will be asked to consider the resolutions that are on tonight's agenda. So if you're here to speak, you'll have an opportunity to speak. We will just do that after staff has had an opportunity to present. And Karen, do we have anybody online?
Do not.
Okay, and help me remember to check that as we get to the actual public hearing portion. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick and Kevin to walk through the presentation for this evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll be taking on this presentation tonight, just going over our budgets that we've worked on since August of this year. This to start off with, I want to thank the council and city staff for all the input and assistance in putting this budget together, and we feel we have a very good budget put together for you. So I'll go over some of the highlights in this presentation. Okay. So the meeting requirements for this Truth and Taxation hearing is just to provide a summary of the budget for 2023. So we'll go over all the funds that the city has and all the different budgets that are associated with those funds. We'll also provide a summary of the proposed tax levy for 2023. This will include the general fund, which is the operating fund of the city, as well as any other tax levies that the city has and their purpose of what those levies are for. And then after this presentation, we will also, as Mayor Bain said, have an opportunity for any public input that they have before any budget or levy is approved. So this slide summarizes all the governmental funds of the city. So this is all the city's funds, with the exception of the water and sewer fund, which are enterprise funds, which we'll look at on the next slide. So in total, the budgeted revenue for all funds here is about $21.4 million, with expenditures being about $21.2 million. So overall, revenues are exceeding expenditures of about $190,000 for these funds. Just to hit some of the funds. The top row is the general fund. That is the main operating fund of the city. This accounts for the majority of the city staff wages, along with just all the general operating and level of services expenditures that the city has for a given operating year. So as you can see, the change in fund balance is zero, leaving the fund balance to remain the same as it was from the prior year. This is a good budget practice to always be budgeting revenues equaling expenditures, and that is what's being proposed in this budget. And we're getting to get into some of those details on some slides coming forth. The next fund this touch base on is a park dedication fund. You can see there's a projected decrease of $363,000. This fund is being looked at with the park master plan and will be looked at closely moving forward into 23 and then when we prepare for the 2024 budget. But this does meet the needs of what the city is projecting for 2023. And as you can see, even though at that decrease, there still is a fund balance in that fund for any expenditures that may come up. The next fund that I want to touch base on is a capital improvement fund. You can see there that fund has a decrease of $687,000. This was part of our big push in this year's budget, was creating 10-year capital plans. So this was one of those funds included in that 10-year operating plan. So even though there is a decrease, you can see that there is a fund balance of 1.6 million. And when we look at the 10-year plan for this fund and projecting out future expenditures, as this fund holds expenditures related to improvement projects, streets repair, streets maintenance and street repairs, street infrastructure costs, that fund balance is healthy to maintain those, to be able to fund those sources moving forward. The next one to touch base on is the capital equipment fund. You can see this one has a pretty significant increase of $1 million. This one also did have a 10-year projection out, and when looking at the fund and the status of how the city wants to pay for this equipment and also the future city and capital equipment needs that the city has, to be able to fund those purchases as they come due, instead of having to borrow funds from the debt, was an initiative that the city proposed with this fund. So seeing that increase is getting that fund balance to a level where the city will be able to maintain and purchase those equipment needs with cash instead of possibly having to take out debt, with the exception of fire trucks. The other large portion of this budget is the debt service funds. This is bonds that have been taken out to fund city infrastructure. So these are the requirements on the tax levy needed to make those debt payments as they come due. There is one new fund up there. It's called the Debt Service Equipment Certificate Fund. The city is planning on issuing equipment certificates in 2023 for the purchase of 2 fire trucks and also 2 snow plows. This slide looks at our water and sewer fund, our 2 enterprise funds of the city. You can see that the ending net position is healthy, being at 16 million for the water fund and about 14.6 for the sewer fund. These funds operate a little bit differently than the funds we just went over, where these funds pay for all their capital needs and all their debt service requirements as well. These funds are extensively looked at as well on a 10-year plan for what the rates need to be with these funds to maintain operation and also fund those capital needs and debt service requirements. So even though there is a rather large decrease here, looking at the 10-year plan of those funds is setting these funds up for success on a going forward. This graph on the next slide, this summarizes where the majority of the revenue is coming in from the city. Again, this excludes all enterprise funds. I also excluded the TIF funds in this revenue chart. So there's a couple of things to point out here. When we look at the total levy when we look at the total revenues and what the levy accounts for about 62% of the revenue from the city as a whole when we look at these funds. One thing to note too, to purchase those fire trucks and also those snow plows in 2023, equipment certificates will be issued or plan to be issued if the budget is approved for about 2.3 million. So that's accounting for just under 11% of the revenue this year to help fund those purchases. Given the current status of the equipment fund and then also the rather large dollar amounts tied to the fire trucks, to have enough cash on hand to pay for those fire trucks is not in the best interest of the city. It's better to issue those equipment certificates when they are needed. The next slide goes over the expenditures for the same funds, excluding TIF and the enterprise funds. Again, you can see the largest portion of the expense in the city is with the general fund being at about 55%, just under that amount. That is the operating expenditures of the city. That is the city staff wages, the supplies, repairs, and operating needs that the city is required to maintain the level of service that the city council and city want to have for the citizens of Forest Lake. After that, the largest expense of the city is those capital needs, street infrastructure, capital equipment, and vehicles needed to help support those functions of the daily operations of the city. The next slide breaks down the operational budget of just the general fund. To note here, the wages account for about 8.1 million of the budget for the general fund, or about 71% of the budget. That's pretty common percentage when I look at cities for comparison for how those operations need. It also is what the staff levels are required to, again, maintain that level of service. The biggest portion is the police budget, just accounting for about 43% of that budget. That is mostly strictly the wages, as we do have many officers out there on the street to help patrol and keep the city safe. And that also includes all the fire wages as well. Next, this slide is going to look at our tax levy. When we looked at what our tax levy was for 2022, it was about $12.2 million. Our proposed levy in the budget is about $13.1 million. That is about a 6.9% increase and an $847,000 increase. The city did start at a proposed levy in September of about 7.52%. Through some updated projections and updated numbers that the city has, we were able to get this down to that 6.9% level there. So with the proposed levy where it currently sits, this is the effect that it's going to have on the values of homes. To point out that first line item of $366,250, that's the first line item on there. When we looked at the numbers that the county gave us, the average home price market value price was $287,000 in the prior year. So given what everyone knows what happened to the values of houses, it was estimated that that house went up about 27.6%. So that number is reflected in that dollar figure. So that first line item, the taxes are going to go up to just the city portion of taxes, mind you, this not including any school district or county levies, but just the city portion of the levy is going up to about $1,281, which will be an increase of about $150. The next line item for a market value of home will go up about 111 and so forth from there. So the average homeowner in the city could expect somewhere from about $110 to $150 increase in their property tax levy in 2023 compared to 2022.
Maybe worth just pointing out the header on proposed 2023 tax impact. It's actually, that's the total tax, so the impact would be the difference between the two. Am I catching that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
So this next slide breaks down where that levy goes. The majority goes to the general fund at 71.5%. This is the operating portion of the city budget that we've discussed before. Most of the city labor costs sit here, any materials and supplies that are needed to provide that level of service in the city. The capital equipment fund accounts for just under 7% of that. That is going to fund the purchases, all the capital equipment and vehicle purchases that the city has, excluding any vehicles or equipment in the water and sewer fund. The plan for this fund, as mentioned before, is to fund all those purchases with cash and fund balance, with the exception of the fire trucks, as it was outlined in our 10-year plan for this fund. The Parks and Trail Fund has a levy of $50,000, so it accounts for this 0.4% of that levy that will be reviewed closer once the Parks Master Plan is updated and finalized for how the city will fund any future parks and trails going forward. There also is a levy dedicated to the Capital Improvement Fund. This fund helps fund any street repairs, street infrastructure projects that keep the cities in operating condition. A large portion of the funding in this fund also comes from municipal state aid that is also in this fund, and then also the city franchise fees go into this fund as well. Next is the debt service that accounts for just over 18% of the levy. These are bonds that were issued to help fund infrastructure projects in the city. So those are the levies that are required to meet those debt service requirements as outlined in the bond documents. And then there's also a levy of $150,000 in the Economic Development Fund. This is the operating revenue in that fund to help with any economic development needs and initiatives. So this next slide looks at where the tax levy increase percentage has been over the past 8 or so years. You can see the past 4 years have been relatively consistent in speaking, ranging from 5% to just over 7%. With the increasing costs of the cost of living increases as outlined in our union contracts, as well as all the other increasing costs as we're all aware of, just to keep up with those demands, this percent is where this percentage of levy came in. The goal of the city is always to make sure to keep that level of service in mind, but also making sure we provide that benefit to the city and keeping that percentage as low as possible. The last slide we'll go over is just the history of the tax rate. The city has been very consistent the past few years, just hovering right around that 40% tax rate. With the values of all the homes significantly increasing, as we discussed before, that is what's causing the decrease of the estimated 35.404 in 2023. I would expect as the market of the houses kind of start to level back out, those values self-adjust, that the city would be right in line with where it has been consistently the past 4 or 5 years. With that, I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments that the city council may have.
Thank you, Kevin. Open it up, council, any questions that you may have at this time before we open up the public hearing?
Well, at the moment, I mean, this is stuff that we've been discussing for the past 3 months, really, and kind of is what it is. And one of the things nice about it, I think everything is pretty well, Patrick, the question to you is, we're pretty well settled with contracts and that sort of thing, so that this is a real number?
This is a real number. Later on this evening, you will hopefully approve 2 contracts, one with the police sergeants and one with the police patrolmen. All the other numbers are in, as far as we know. There's no other estimates that we could give you at this time, so this is what it is.
All right. That's the only question I had.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions at this time? All right, with that, we'll open it up for public comment. If anyone is in attendance and would like to make comment this evening, I would welcome you to go to the podium, and we're happy to hear your thoughts. And with that, we'll open up the public hearing. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Karen, is there anyone online?
Mayor Bain, I don't have anyone online.
Okay. We'll keep it open here for just a few moments. Okay, not seeing anyone step forward for public hearing, we'll close public hearing and bring conversation back to council. Council, for our consideration tonight are a number of resolutions, and the first resolution to start us off is 12-12-2201, which is a resolution to set the 2023 tax levy and adopt the 2023 budgets. Before we were to move on to resolutions, any, I guess, other additional discussion or general questions anyone wants to ask? All right. With that, I will entertain a motion if anyone is ready.
Mayor Bain, I make a motion to adopt Resolution 12-12-22-01, setting the 2023 tax levy and adopting the 2023 budget.
I'll second.
Excellent. We've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor of the motion signal by saying aye.
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 Oppose? And our motion is approved. Next tonight is the Resolution 12-12-2202, which is to elect the standard allowance available under the Revenue Loss Prevention of the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund established under the American Rescue Plan Act. And Kevin, is this yours as well?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Mayor and council members, so as we've discussed previously with the budgets, the city did receive money related to the American Rescue Plan Act. And at the previous council meeting, there was a memo brought forward to you from our city financial statement auditors, saying that the revenue loss provision is an acceptable use of those funds and declaration to be able to use those funds, and recommended formalizing that through a resolution. So what this is doing is council is formalizing that the city will be electing the revenue loss provision as it's related to this funding, and claiming public safety wages related to that revenue loss provision.
Thank you, Kevin. I know we had a fairly quick workshop discussion on this previously. Any further questions for Kevin on this? All right, ready for a motion if anyone's ready?
Mayor Bain, I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 12-22-02, a resolution to elect the standard allowance available under the revenue loss provision of the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund established under the American Rescue Plan Act.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And motion carries. And finally, our final resolution tonight is Resolution 12-22-03, which is related to transfers for that fund. And Kevin, I'll turn it over to you to explain further.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and City Council. So again, goes back to those budget discussions we've had. So the city received just under $2.3 million in this American Rescue Plan Act funding. Through those budget discussions and how it was presented to the City Council, the use of those funds would greatly impact the citizens of the city if used for water infrastructure projects. The use of the funds towards water infrastructure projects was a major push with the use of this funding, and it will greatly benefit those citizens by not having to take out debt for some of these projects, and keeping some of those water rates as proposed lower. So with approving that resolution prior, those funds reside currently in the general fund. So to get those funds into the water fund, if approved, this resolution would authorize the city to move those funds out of the general fund and into the water fund to be restricted to be used for those infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Kevin. Council, any questions on this resolution? All right, ready for a motion when anyone's ready?
Mayor Bain, I move adoption of resolution number 12-22-03, a resolution approving transfer of American Rescue Plan Act dollars to the water fund.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And motion is approved. With that, we are at the end of our agenda for tonight's planned Truth and Taxation hearing, and so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.